welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious. Ex-cult members. What was your, oh shit, I'm in a cult moment. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Googled my cult's name for the first time, which I thought was just the name of the church, and saw many articles about how the leader was charged for raping and sexually assaulting women. I showed my fellow cult members and they told me the leader said that all those articles are lying and that we shouldn't believe them. I reflected some more and realized that weekday services at 4 a.m. and Sunday services that lasted 7 hours were absolutely not normal. I was in a cult that was run by a family member. It was a small group and we were to give 100% loyalty to this family member, financial and everything. It escalated to be my whole life for a good 5 years and I didn't know what normal relationships were. I met a guy and he showed me what love actually is. He told me that this relationship I had with this family member wasn't loving and I immediately knew. Told him everything and was out since then. It was so hard to say, I think I might be in a cult. But I did. Blacklisted family member and other members and haven't looked back. When I was stationed on Okinawa late 90s, I went to this church that seemed to be the pretty generic Christian church, but they met in a small room above a store. Didn't think much about it until they got a new pastor. They owned a house in town and always invited everyone over for some cookouts and Bible study. The new pastor was actively encouraging the enlisted service members to move into the house and get the housing allowance to support the house. Then, he wanted to see our LES, think pay stubs, to ensure we were supporting the church enough. I think the final straw was when they started taking attendance for their 7 days. Yep, you were expected to attend some church thing 7 days a week of services and trying to shame anyone that didn't make it to something. I didn't tell them I wasn't going anymore, just stopped showing up. They knew where my barracks room was and sent soul savers to get me back to the church. The last time they talked to me, they again went with the shame route that no other church would get me into heaven, and I told them I think they proved I made the right decision. I was in Okinawa in the late 90s as well. I guess I missed out on that church service. When the leader wanted to split up all the marriages and take the wives for himself, and when he wanted to give the husbands of those wives different women to be with, basically sharing the women, except nobody had a say in who they were to be with. Many people were deeply unhappy and pained by this, but they had to submit to the Holy Spirit, as they would say, and do what they were told. I was a teen at the time, my family and I left this cult, so thankfully I was not pawned off on some random guy. I was born into Scientology. Even though I internally questioned a lot when I was younger, I'd learned very early on not to actually question anything. My aha moment was when I was ready to go on to the next step, and one of the other members, who not so surprisingly is also an ex-member now, asked me why I was planning on doing what I was doing. And my answer was, it's what's expected of me. I went home and really thought about what I wanted and realized I didn't actually agree with most things in Scientology. I started to process to leave shortly after. I had to leave the right way, since my dad and sister are still very involved and I don't want to lose them from my life. When I realized that only those who had significantly contributed financially were able to advance, I learned that my father had poured thousands into the system and each special course we had attended as children cost thousands each. Honestly, I don't know if it is a cult or not, but a friend of mine has been vague about her religion, Orissa, and the way her parents treat her and the way she acts. It seems like she is in a cult. She has luckily come to the realization that her religion may be a bit troublesome, and the second she can move out, she will. I always kinda knew, but it really clicked for me when I was 15. My friend, also 15, had recently gotten knocked up by someone else in our youth program and had gotten an abortion. Told almost no one. Within a week, she and her entire family were ousted from the church, and they railed on her and her sins for months. I think that's the moment I knew when I was done. My grandpa, who was not in the church, also used to tell me they were on an FBI watch list as a hate group. Don't know the validity of that, but I wouldn't say it was unwarranted. South Korean cult. I attended, but thankfully didn't join in the end. I had just moved to Korea at 18 years old and didn't really know anyone. I was just starting to learn Korean, conversational but still low level, and didn't really have a lot of friends yet, someone invited me to go to church with them, and they were really nice, and I wanted to meet people. I had a lot of fun at this church. The people would take me out to eat, help me with Korean, and even help me with my homework or test prep. It was 100% the nicest church I've ever visited, and I felt like I had a place to fit in now. This is how they suck people in. Also, there was a female pastor who was super hot and would sometimes let people, always younger men, stay with her if they needed a place. I always wondered if this was an intentional tactic to try to lure more young men in, because the specific church, one location of many, seemed to only go after men. Eventually, they started pressuring me to make myself unhealthy, saying that there was a balance between physical and spiritual strength. I love bodybuilding, so me being physically strong was an issue. They were pressuring me to lose muscle and to try to make myself sick if possible, to make my body as weak as possible. They said if I didn't, my soul would grow restless and crawl out of my mouth when I was asleep. I repeatedly said that I wasn't interested but wanted to continue attending this church. This was not acceptable at all. They strongly pressured me to start making myself sick. I stopped going to the church, and they waited outside of my school for me and followed me around for what seems like a couple of months. They knew my class schedule and were always outside trying to talk to me. Eventually, in the end, they backed off and I never heard from them again. Another guy from the church also got creeped out and left, and we're still good friends to this day. I was raised Latter-day Saints, which isn't a cult per se, but there's some strong cultish tendencies. There was a lot of stuff. I'll see if I can list it. I had a hard time with discerning fact from fiction for a while when I was a kid because I was surrounded by adults who claimed to literally hear the voice of God speak to them when they prayed, or attributed stuff like finding the keys you lost earlier that day in a location you definitely would have left them to the direct intervention of God in worldly affairs, i.e., God is real, He's here on earth, He talks to me and helps me find shit I misplaced. I participated in a baptism for the dead where I was baptized in place of someone who died a while ago, whose name had been submitted to the temple by a family member probably, where I changed into a white jumpsuit and was dunked under the water by an elder in my faith in a tub of lukewarm water held elevated from the ground by 12 life-size gold-painted oxen statues. It was cool though, because afterwards we went go-karting. I lost all the races, but it was still fun. I was told to the end of days was right around the corner, and I needed to prep some food and stuff for when Jesus came, because before Jesus came, the geopolitical situation had been prophesied to make it difficult to get food. So my mom had a bunch of instant potatoes in the basement for when Jesus came back. The shooting of a child predator, emotional abuser, arsonist murderer, self-styled militia leader was pitched to me as a tragic martyrdom. Good times. I've got some dank casserole recipes in the quiver for when winter rolls around again, and some of that God is with you and will help you succeed delusion helped me start a pattern of academic success, which put me in a pretty decent career. When parents and church leaders took me to the Mormon temple for the first time, and the first order of business was I had to get naked so some stranger could touch me near my privates and bless them, I was allowed to put a small drape on when walking around all the strangers in the room, but still it was horrifying when they first reached inside it and touched me. This ritual was a requirement for me to be a Mormon missionary. I tried telling Mom and a few leaders that it made me uncomfortable without sounding like too big of a wuss, but their answer is straight out of the most Mormon literature. You need to keep going back until you understand it better. Apparently, the fault was in me for not being spiritual enough. Today, I'm an ex-Mormon because I decided that this, and a lot of other major problems with Mormonism, just wasn't right. I'm no religious expert, but getting naked and being touched by strangers, usually a pretty good warning sign. I had little moments through the years, but the major one was when my pastor gave me a time limit with friends and a curfew, while my husband was allowed to do anything he wanted. I was apostolic Pentecostal. Pretty much the whole congregation, including family, shunned me. I'm remarried now, and my husband works with many of the people from that church, and they will speak to him right next to me and act like I'm not there. It's been over 5 years now, and they still shun me. My brother-in-law joined the Mormon church years ago. He decided to go on a mission trip, and the restrictions on when he could talk to family made him realize it was more of a cult than he thought. I don't remember the specifics, but he was allotted minimal time for phone calls, all emails to us were monitored, and he couldn't come home for the holidays. The whole ostracizing you from your family and friends was a red flag for him. He didn't leave right away, but he started using it for socialization and networking for employment. When he wasn't around Mormons, he drank alcohol and coffee and had sex. I was around a lot of Mormons when we lived near him, and they made it very clear the purpose of their friendliness was to convert. They invited me to a class at the church that was free. A few weeks in, they messaged me to talk about God. I declined politely, and within a week they no longer offered the class. They all stopped talking to me once they knew I would not convert. Not exactly what was asked, but a fascinating story. A friend of mine is adopted. For years, he was weighing the pros and cons of trying to find his birth family. One of the major cons was the expense. Anyway, one Christmas, his wife bought him a genetic testing kit. One of those things where you spend $100 and you find out what percentage of your genetic background traces back to where. It turns out, when you do this, they also match you on their database to relatives. He found out that he had a genetic cousin who'd also taken the test. He got in contact with the guy. The guy talked to his parents, and they were able to piece the story together. My friend's parents are married to each other. Back when his bio mom got pregnant with him, she and the father were not married, and because my friend's bio dad was with JW, he could have been disfellowshipped for having sex before marriage. So instead, she had the child quietly, gave him up for adoption, then they got married and proceeded to have 3 more kids. So my friend suddenly found his bio family, including 3 full-blooded brothers that he might never have known about. We joke about how his parents did him a favor by giving him up instead of raising him in a cult. That being said, there are a lot of complicated emotions involved in that kind of situation. 2 months before my marriage to my wife, getting my endowments at the Mormon temple. I researched Mormonism when I joined the religion. I really wanted to believe in it, so I guess I just ignored the dodgy history. It was so fun being a member up until that point in the temple. I went to the temple with no knowledge. I didn't want to be cynical about it. It was the only thing I was open-minded about. I guess the temple never really was on my mind up until that point. After that, my shelf broke. Nothing was the same. It was like an illusion was gone and I could see all the bad stuff. My dad was visiting me that day. He had to wait outside and I went in with my new family. That was the first sign of bad things to happen. As soon as the strange chanting happened, I knew I'd effed up. I was madly in love like never before, and not going forward with Mormonism meant losing my fiancé. I was like a rabbit in the headlights. I ended up just going through with the marriage, but ultimately my marriage failed in the 9th month when I realized I had no power over my own life anymore, and I was in an abusive, controlling relationship, mostly from my wife's in-laws. My wife still stuck in it. She is autistic and has no friends outside of it, and even though she knows it's a con, she also knows she has nothing else. My biggest regret is I should have done it better, worked out a way to pull her out. I failed my wife, and it pains me to this day. I miss my wife every day. I feel like that guy in Game of Thrones, Master Aemon, which is an honor without love, etc. Resigning from the church was a must. I had to stand up and protect LGBT people and the children whom have been abused at the LDS church. At the same time, I do often wonder if I've thrown away happiness for the sake of honor and truth. I miss my wife every morning when I go to bed. It is a lonely life I lead. I sleep better knowing I did the best I could. F cults. I was young and needed friends in a new college. Church of Christ was very huggy and friendly, but suddenly was pressured to give up all my secrets confidentially, and they would tell others, and when I asked why it was, "We just want to help you." First or second time may be a mistake, but it was over and over, and I told them how messed up they were and left. Was very hurt by them, forced to say I was gay by one member, and 2 friends were hurt too, but in different ways. They called me to vent for a while. Update. It was the Glendale location in California. They were in Pasadena City College. They did Bible talks, and we were pressured to bring new people to them. A number of midweek church events, pressure to get married within. They did studies with new members, including a darkness study, where I was asked over and over again by one member if I struggled with homosexuality until I confessed. One of their standard questions. He was supposed to keep it a secret, even per their rules, but told their main guy anyway, and he started acting strange around me, and I didn't know why at the time. Also, super focused on negativity, like the bitch that told me I needed to smile more every time she saw me. If it didn't work the first time, I didn't need it 10 or 20 more times, Margaret. XJW. First, I realized this was definitely a cult when the leaders called everyone who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness a worldly person, and followers were to have very little contact with the outside world. I went to regular public high school, and that's looked down upon because of the bad influences surrounding you. College is highly frowned upon as well. Many of the followers of this church are homeschooled and work from a family business. I was gossiped about because I wasn't homeschooled and I participated in school clubs and sports. Second, people involved in the religion can become disfellowshipped. When you do something that's considered a bad sin, adultery, sex before marriage, dating before the age to get married, gambling, binge drinking, any drug, etc., the elders, heads of the individual branch of the church, decide if you are truly sorry, and if you aren't, you become disfellowshipped. No one can talk to you, including family or any friends. Immediate family can talk to you, but only for basic day-to-day needs. Many other reasons I realized Jehovah's Witnesses are a cult, but these were the two biggest. If by cult you mean a religion that recruits with lies, retains with brainwashing, and demands devotion in the form of money, time, proselytizing, then I started leaving my cult almost 2 decades ago. The Mormon religion has been described as a high-functioning cult because they are mainstream enough to have prominent celebrities, politicians, and a reputation for being good people. The religion started as an apocalyptic sex cult in the early 1800s and would have died out organically after its founder's death if it hadn't been for a perfect storm of polygamy. Hard to quit once you start. Pioneers, priesthood tiers like Scientology, there's always a higher level of membership to achieve, accompanied by secret ritualistic temple ceremonies. I know of no definition of cult that the early Mormon church doesn't fit to a T. Perhaps a more relevant question is whether the modern Mormon church evolved from the original hardcore cult can still be called a cult, and only a first-order comparison between the recruitment and retention methods of the modern Mormon church and, say, any evangelical Protestant religion is needed to demonstrate that, indeed, the modern Mormon church remains a cult. If anyone wants more information about the institutionalized deception employed by their missionary effort, or the mind control and cultural pressure strategies the church practices to keep members from leaving, ask away. My only ever experience with Jehovah's Witnesses was a kid I played Little League Baseball with. He was a good pitcher, but he couldn't play on Saturdays, I guess because of church, and never really played anymore, so wasted talent? I don't know.